So there were a couple of articles in the last couple of weeks relating to amulets and relating to Jewish symbols that we know are part of our Jewish experience, or many people's Jewish experience. Sometimes it's reflected in the Hamsa necklace. Sometimes it's reflected in the red string people wear that you pick up in Jerusalem, which has origins being wrapped around Rachel's tomb in Bethlehem. And this first headline caught my eye. It's from the Jewish press last month. Happens to be all of these headlines that are of a related subject, but very different in terms of where they're coming from. The first is an ancient Hebrew amulet discovered at Joshua's altar in Samaria. An ancient amulet made of lead and written in ancient Hebrew was found among the remains of the excavation carried out at the archaeological site on Mount Ebal in Samaria, where the biblical era altar of Joshua ben Nun is located. The amulet is inscribed with the letter Aleph in a mark reminiscent of a lotus flower. Book of Joshua describes how the Israelite general who commanded the conquest of Canaan built an altar on Mount Ebal, acting on instructions from Moses after the Israelites crossed the Jordan River. And this is the whole idea of Mount Ebal is mentioned at the end of the book of Devarim. Haifa University archaeologist Adam Zertal, who passed away in 2015, identified the remains of an altar found at the site as the one described in the Bible, where Joshua distributed land among the tribes. Zertal's research showed the area to be a unique ritual site for offering sacrifices. The dating of the altar to the period of the Israelites' entry into the land, the similarity between the excavated structure and the altar described in the Bible, and the fact that only kosher animal bones were found at the site led the researchers to conclude that this is the altar that Joshua built on Mount Ebal. Joshua's altar is the only currently known remnants from the period of the Israelite conquest of Canaan. Professor Zertal believed this was the altar around which the covenant ceremony mentioned in the book of Joshua took place. So that's a pretty incredible archaeological find. The fact that there is something that dates back to the period when the Jewish nation entered into the land, led by Joshua, remnants of an altar that would have been used in a ritual that is described in the Torah. In Israel, the entire country is an archaeological site, so that's not surprising. The different types, some of the archaeology is finding things that date back, far pre-biblical times. But here's something that fits in with our narrative. A couple months back, we had a professor of archaeology from Bar Ilan University who was sharing some of the finds that he was involved in. Right, it is especially for those of us who take archaeology seriously and the biblical story seriously, to find the times when it lines up or possibly could line up can be very exciting. But this amulet, was what stuck in my mind from this. The types of Hebrew that were in there, the Aleph that was on this amulet was not the Aleph that we're used to, that we read in our Siddur. This was the ancient Hebrew was more of an animal. I think like a deer, because an ayal is like the gazelle, a deer, and so that was the type of symbolism that was there. And and what were they doing with amulets? Okay, so that's story number one. Second story was from the Times of Israel, and it was from the next day, January 27th. This was in the period of International Holocaust Memorial, International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Shema Yisrael pendants uncovered in Sobibor death camp in Poland. 3 pendants bearing the Hebrew prayer Shema Yisrael have been excavated at the Sobibor extermination camp in Poland, the Israel Antiquities authorities announced on Thursday. 2 of the amulets depict Moses holding the 10 Commandments on the reverse side. Researchers have been able to identify that the 3 pendants, all different from one another and made by hand, originated in Eastern Europe. One came from Lviv in Ukraine, also in the headlines these days, and the other 2 from Poland and Czechoslovakia. The nearly decade-long excavations of the site, where approximately 250,000 Jews were killed by the Nazis between 1942 and 1943, were directed by Wojciech Mazurek from Poland, Yoram Haimi from the IAI, and Ivar Schut from the Netherlands, assisted by local residents. Little is known about the stories behind the pendants, which are heartbreaking, Hayimi said in a statement. It has been possible to identify a kind of tradition or fashion among the Jewish communities of Eastern Europe with pendants that were described with Shema Yisrael on one side and the depiction of Moses and the tablets of the law on the opposite side. But were they distributed in synagogues by local Jewish communities or possibly produced for individual orders? Research of the pendants is ongoing. We invite public to provide us with details concerning them. One of the pendants was discovered in the remains of a building where Jews were undressed before being led to the gas chambers. Another on which Latin numbers were inscribed was uncovered in the area where victims were undressed in Camp 2. A third was next to a mass grave. The personal human aspect of the discovery of these pendants is chilling, said Eli Esposito, director of the IAA. They represent a thread running between generations of Jews, actually a thick thread, thousands of years old, of prayer and faith. And so obviously it's an ongoing project to understand how popular or how widespread the practice was. But again, as is pointed out, in this place of Jewish destruction, these symbols of Jewish faith, and what exactly are they used for? How were they utilized? Where do they come from? And the same day headline from the AP, out of this world, right? 555.55 carat black diamond lands in Dubai. Auction house Sotheby's Dubai has unveiled a diamond that's literally from out of this world. Sotheby's calls the 555.55 carat black diamond believed to have come from outer space, the Enigma. Sophie Stevens, a jewelry specialist at Sotheby's Dubai, told the AP that the number 5 bears an important significance to the diamond, which has 55 facets as well. The shape of the diamond is based on the Middle Eastern palm symbol of the Hamsa, which stands for strength and stands for protection, she said. Hamsa in Arabic means 5, right? Chamesh, that's similar Arabic in Hebrew. So there's a nice theme of the number 5 running throughout the diamond, she added. Okay, so amulets, ancient amulets, Holocaust amulets, Hamsas, diamonds. I think I saw a headline that the diamond sold for not 5.5 million, but I think I saw 4.5 million. I don't remember the number. You can check online. So here are some headlines invoking Jewish amulets, Jewish symbols, and the like. Reactions, thoughts to these stories before we start looking into some of the Jewish sources that inform our understanding of these types of symbols, symbolism, and the impact that they have. Okay, so let's go to the sources. In general, amulets, these symbols are often associated with protection. Protection from what? So the idea is the Ayin Hara. So what is the Ayin Hara? Where does the Ayin Hara appear? So in Pirkei Avos, in several places, the word Ayin Hara appears. And it's one of them is in chapter 2, verse Mishnah 11. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Ayin Hara v'yetzer hara v'sinas habrios motziin es ha'adam min ha'olam. An evil eye, the evil inclination, and hatred for humankind put a person out of the world. So here, the Ayin Hara is not necessarily, doesn't seem to be something mystical or symbolic. It's having a bad attitude. Right? Ayin Hara literally means bad eye. There's sometimes they talk about the stink eye. They give the person a dirty look, right? That's something to how it's usually understood. But Ayin Hara, that's how it appears in its initial appearance in classic rabbinic Talmudic Judaism. Now, the idea of there being a negative influence of the evil eye is seen in a couple of statements in the Talmud. Not sometimes in the Talmud is written in the Aramaic. So the Ayin Hara, the words don't appear there. It's Eina Bisha is the Aramaic for Ayin Hara. So source number 2, Gemara Bava Basra. Rav Chisda says, if one gives birth to a daughter first, it is a good sign for sons. There are those who say that this is because she raises her brothers, helps in their upbringing. And those that say this is because the evil eye does not have dominion over the father. So it has some, an aphorism about how the family, the order of family children being born, right? Have a girl first, she'll be the oldest, she'll be the responsible one, she'll take care of everyone else. That's a good way. Now, there are those who say that if a girl is born first, then the Ayin Hara, the evil eye, does not have dominion over the father. Why is that so? Could be that there's a sense that there's an Ayin Hara, some sort of evil force, and having that girl first, which is good for family planning, because the older child as a girl being able to take care of the younger siblings is a good thing. And so, maybe since it's good for family planning, it's almost as if the father's born under a lucky star and does not have the evil eye having dominion over him. Right, this is how it was understood, these teachings, but here we seem to see that there's an evil eye that has dominion. Another expression of this evil eye having dominion and trying to, in this example in the Talmud, have the evil eye avoided, its dominion avoided. Rabbi Yitzchak says, blessing is found only in a matter concealed from the eye. As it is said, the Lord will command blessing with you in your storehouses, where the grain is concealed. Right? The blessing takes place behind the public view. The school of Rabbi Yishmael taught blessing is found only in a matter over which the eye has no dominion. As it is stated, the Lord will command blessing with you in your storehouses. So there's the idea of a blessing taking place away from the public eye because the eye has no dominion. This is, the idea that when we don't want to be proud about what we have. This is where the whole the expression kind of hara comes from. We'll see that this does not have a Talmudic precedent, but the Talmud here is saying, you want to keep your blessing. How many children do you have? Some people say, I have 3, kind of hara. Why? I just told you how many I have, which means I've revealed the number. Once I've revealed the number, there's this eye which has dominion. So I'm modifying my response so that I have 3 that the evil eye can't control, type of a situation. These are the Talmudic. This is the Talmudic source for the idea that we don't want to talk about what we have, because if we reveal it, then the Ayin Hara, that will know that it is true. Now, just because you don't say it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? If people could see it, then it exists, and if they can't see it, then they don't know it exists. It brings to mind like the whole Mr. Snuffleupagus on Sesame Street, right? Big Bird couldn't see it, but we could see it. Is it real? Is it not real? This was once compared on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. Think about an Eruv which surrounds a community, right? Many people can't see it or know where it is, but it's there, right? But here, if you have, but it seems that the concern is about the evil eye, that there's the Ayin Hara, which is going to have some type of impact, and this even guided behavior. There's a rule in the Talmud that connects to this, source number 4, Bava Batra. It's prohibited for a person to stand in another's field and look at his crop while the grain is standing. What's wrong with looking at another person's field? Rashi, so the Ayin Hara won't damage it. Right, this is Rashi writing in the 11th century. There's a concern. We don't want you gazing at someone else's property or someone else's field, because the Ayin Hara, the evil eye, will negatively impact the growth of the grain crop. Right, now, it should be noted that not everyone agrees with Rashi. And we have to just back up for a minute, because the tractate Bava Batra in this part is dealing with a legal concept known as Hezek Re'iyah, which means the damage caused by looking. Right, the Talmud, the Bavas, the Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Basra, right? The Bava means a gate, not a grandma. Bubby is Yiddish, but Bava means a gate. So you have the first gate, the middle gate, the last gate. They are kind of a 3-volume compendium of Jewish civil tort damage law. And there's something called Hezek Re'iyah, that you can be liable for looking into your neighbor's property. And it's not about Ayin Hara. Rashi says, looking at the crop, is you worried that the Ayin Hara will negatively or adversely affect it? But there's this idea of privacy. It dates back to what we're very familiar with when Bilam was looking at the Jewish people's encampment and said, "Ma tovu ahalech Yaakov." How wonderful are your camps? And the tradition is that the Jewish people set up their camps so that people can look into each other's windows. There's a certain sense of privacy. And from there, the rabbis, there is a law against invading someone's privacy. It's actually interesting that such a thing does not exist in secular law. Especially, those of us who live or have ever lived in apartment buildings in Manhattan, there's no law against looking into your neighbor's windows. It's creepy. It might be, show a lack of decency, but it's not illegal. You don't want to be seen. What do? Lower the blinds. But there's really no laws against looking into other people's affairs on the books. Jewish law there is, and that's part of from that original tradition of the tents and this hezekriya. You're not allowed to look in someone else's property. It's against religious law. It's not about any evil eye. It's just not right. People have a right to. There are rules about privacy, rules about modesty, rules about privacy. That's where it comes into play. But here, Rashi seems to take one of these regulations about looking into the field. What could be wrong with it? You'll cast the evil eye. Now, when this law is discussed by Maimonides, Maimonides does not mention the evil eye. Maimonides puts this relates to the laws of protecting people's privacy, and that's because Maimonides was very much a rationalist and did not factor in this Ayin Hara, evil dominion, evil forces element, much more rationalist. But Rashi does see this as an issue, and it guides our behavior. Now, we don't really have as much to do with fields anymore. We're not really in a position of enforcing these regulations about people not looking at each other's property. It's people, for the most part, we're very much, it's left up to the honor system. We don't have religious police going around to make sure people aren't looking into other people's affairs. But the Ayin Hara element that Rashi introduces to the law of gazing into the field in source number 5, this concern of Ayin Hara does find expression in a few other places. So, for example, source number 6. This is with regards to getting called to the Torah. 2 brothers may be called up for an aliyah, one after the other, and so too a son after a father. But we refrain from doing so only because of the Ayin Hara, is what the Shulchan Aruch says. So Rama, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, the Ashkenazi, comments, and even if one was called up for the 7th aliyah, and the other one was called up for the maftir, the second one should not be called up by his name because of Ayin Hara, right? You don't want to have, you don't want to reveal this relationship. You don't want to reveal this kinship, this familial tie. You don't want to reveal the abundance of the blessings. You're the 2 sons, one right after the other. We don't want the Ayin Hara to come and swoop down. And if it was done, don't name the second brother, right? Usually we call people to the Torah them with their name, with their father's name. So if you have 2 brothers, the Ramah says, and one is called for the 7th aliyah, and after the 7th aliyah, we recite the half Kaddish, and then we have the maftir called up. And if you're going to have them called up even that way, with that separation, don't call them up by the name. It's almost as if you don't mention the name, then the Ayin Hara won't have the influence. So this does seem to show some pretty significant concern for the impact of an Ayin Hara. We know whether it's superstitious, whether it's a genuine power of the dark side, whether it's inviting a curse. Another example of this, it has to do with, there are 2 times in the Torah where there are blessings and curses are mentioned. The Tochacha, right? In Parsha V'chukosai, in Parsha Kisavo, we read about the blessings and the curses, and it is common practice to have the curses read more quietly. So if you've ever been in shul and the Torah is being read and all of a sudden the reader lowers his voice, that's probably because he's up to that part of the Torah. Now, probably more important for the reader to read it so everyone can hear it and not lower the voice, but this practice is very powerful. Why? we don't want to read about bad things. Okay, we get it. You can read about the good things loudly and the bad things less loudly. It still seems a little strange, but there's a whole conversation about who should get called to that aliyah, because who are you going to saddle with all the bad news, with all the bad stuff? And so, some feel that you don't want to associate anyone's name by calling that person to the Torah, let alone having to, stand there and listen to that content. So some communities don't call that aliyah to the Torah. And the reader just starts reading, and they don't do the Ya'amod, so-and-so, son of so-and-so, that they normally do for the others, to avoid specifically associating that person with the curses, kind of like an Ayin Hara situation. Suffice it to say, in some communities, it was not a popular aliyah, right? And often it's the Gabai's job to make sure that people get the right aliyahs, and no one wants this aliyah. So some places, some communities in Eastern Europe had a practice of hiring someone to receive that aliyah, right? So if you want someone to take the bad stuff, you had to make it worth their while. And so the story is told about one shul that had made this arrangement, and this was the sixth aliyah, and the person they had hired to take the aliyah wasn't there yet. And they were waiting because no one else wanted the aliyah, and they're waiting and waiting and waiting. 20 minutes later, he finally shows up, and they're kind of upset. We hired you to do this. What took you so long? He's like, what, you think I can make a living getting the aliyah only in one shul? Right. So he hired himself out to the community. In any event, but there too, this this idea of we don't want to have two brothers or father and son. We don't want the Ayin Hara to notice the family on display. That is an expression of concern for Ayin Hara that makes its way into our practice. So what about avoiding the Ayin Hara? So we mentioned the idea of Kaina Hara. Where does Kaina Hara come from? It's kind of the Yiddish recitation of the expression in Hebrew, Bali Ayin Hara, right? Without the Ayin Hara. So it's one of the ways that we try to respond to whatever threat there may be, or we think there may be from the Ayin Hara, is to pretend it's not there, or to say it's not there, right? If I don't say it, it can't make an impact, or if I say it can't make an impact, it's not making an impact. So how many children do you have? 3 kind of Hara, right? I'm ready to put out the number I have by shielding myself from any negative influence the Ayin Hara may have. So that's one way of doing it. And so that expression does not find origins, it makes sense to say, but doesn't find any source in rabbinic literature. But source number 7 mentions there is an expression that is found, that one who enters a city and fears the evil eye should hold the thumb of his right hand in his left and the thumb of his left hand in the right, and recite the following: I, so-and-so, son of so-and-so, among the descendants of Yosef, over whom the evil eye has no dominion, as it is stated, Yosef is a fruitful vine, ben parat Yosef, a fruitful vine by a fountain, alei Ayin, its branches run over the wall. So it says, ben parat alei Ayin. Don't read it as alei Ayin, rather as olei Ayin. Joseph rises above the eye. The evil eye has dominion on him. And this Talmudic statement about it's almost as if you're giving the evil eye the finger. Or in this case, you're giving it the thumbs. But you should declare, being a descendant of Joseph, ben parat Yosef. This leads to a practice of, especially among Sephardim, to say ben parat Yosef as their bli ayin hara. This is the Talmudic equivalent of bli ayin hara, ben parat Yosef. Right? The idea that Joseph transcended the evil eye. So ben parat Yosef, by invoking Joseph and being a descendant of Joseph, or claiming Joseph as our ancestor, that's how we get out of that's how we escape the evil eye, ben parat Yosef. So there is a Talmudic precedent for that, ben parat Yosef, which has gotten extended and understood as bli ayin hara. Okay. So then there are, when it comes to defeating the evil eye, we encounter this idea of a Hamsa. And in 16th century Kabbalistic literature, source number 8, there is a great segula, right? A segula is a valued practice. or value, or there is value in general in the letter Hey, that wherever it is found, either actually written or imagined or uttered, or in the image of a single hand with its 5 fingers, fashioned of any metal and hung on a young man or on anything in the world, then accidents will not befall him. And this is effective in particular to remove stubbornness of the heart, shrirut lev, and ayin hara. So here we have this idea of 5. Say it, think it, visualize it, craft it, make it out of something, put it on. You have the idea of this is to defeat the ayin hara. So this was Rabbi Yitzchak Okinira's declaration, and it finds expression in practice. Source number 9, Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai, known as the Chida, writing some 200 years later. And so they are accustomed to be spared from ayin hara to fashion a silver hay. And similarly, they are accustomed to say 5 to be spared by ayin hara. And if taking it further, by Yosef Chaim, the Ben Ish Chai, source number 10, right? This is kind of the 1900s. The Gon Chida writes that the general custom is to say 5 in order to avoid an evil eye. This is the reason for hanging a picture of a hand with 5 fingers and the Hebrew letter Hey on it, which has a numerical value of 5. The Keter Malchut writes that it would appear from the Talmud that people living in Babylonia must be more careful to avoid the evil eye than in other places. Rabbi Yosef Chaim was writing in Baghdad, which was Babylonia, probably describing the practice of his time. So Hamsa is a further expression of avoiding the evil eye. The Talmud makes mention of a way of avoiding it, Ben Parat Yosef, and this gets internalized and turned in different directions to it. The power of 5. Why 5? The whole hand, completion. We when it comes to the significance of numbers, we could probably come up with all sorts of, the Hey in God's name, all types of different things that becomes stated as protective, finds expression in practice, and is even fairly common by the time you get to 1900s, as expressed by Rabbi Yosef Chaim, the power of the Hamsa. So that is with regards at least to that specific amulet. We'll talk about other amulets in the final couple of sources, but just any reactions, questions, comments to what we've seen so far. I'm trying to figure out how many markers Howard has up in his picture. I think it's 6, not 5. But if it was 5, it would be a great expression of this Hamsa principle. So what about these amulets? This is a description of the practice. This is a mention of the spiritual energy. What about in Jewish law? So the Shulchan Aruch mentions in source number 11, it is permitted to be healed by an amulet, even if it has divine names inside. Right? This is what's called a kamiyah. It is similarly permitted to carry amulets that have verses inside. Talking about, if you read the whole article that's mentioned in the Jewish press, the first article that we looked at, when they examined the amulet that they found in that Mount Ebal archaeological site, they realized that it seemed to have been crafted that it was empty inside and had room for parchment, but it was way too fragile to study physically. There's all types of new technology that you can analyze and image things and even almost try and reconstruct it, so that they were able to have that type of analysis performed, computer video analysis performed, that would recreate what the whole amulet looked like. And it seems as if there was space inside to hold a piece of paper or parchment with certain words. Obviously, the parchment had disintegrated over time. They didn't know what was on it, but that's what the Shulchan Aruch is talking about. They have verses inside. This is specifically for protection, not to become ill, but does not permit someone who has a wound or an illness to be healed by them, but is forbidden to write verses in the amulets. So the Shulchan Aruch has mentioned that we have a bit of a conflicted relationship, right? You can be healed by an amulet that has Hashem's name in it, but not random verses. Also, you're allowed to carry it, and he's talking about specifically with regards to Shabbos. Wearing this type of amulet is considered part of the person, not considered external, that you would be violating Shabbat by carrying, obviously without an eruv. But there's this idea of protection. The butters are not supposed to be healed by the ones that have verses in them, and you shouldn't write verses in them in the first place. So there's kind of, they exist. We're not happy they exist. If it has Hashem's name in it, then that's something holy. If someone wrote something else in there, they shouldn't have, but if they did, it's okay. If you want to keep it as kind of to ward off evil spirits for protection, but you shouldn't invoke this for healing, right? This is something this is something foreign from us. And we spoke a couple of weeks ago. We spoke about evil spirits and evil forces having influence. We spoke about witches. This is kind of the Shulchan Aruch seems to be combining all sorts of different attitudes. There are spiritual forces. There's the power of the divine name to heal. We don't want to rely on spiritual forces to heal. If you're wearing it, it's okay, right? So what is this all based on? So there was a much earlier conversation that was found. Sources 12 and 13 are from the Rashba. The Rashba was someone who was living in the epicenter between Germany, Germany and France and Spain. So straddling the Ashkenaz and Sephardic realms. And he's living in the 13th century post-Maimonidean world, so very aware of the teachings of Maimonides. And for us, Maimonides is already one of the pillars of our understanding of Jewish law. But when Maimonides first emerged, there was some controversy for all sorts of reasons. There was controversy because Maimonides created a code of Jewish law. Codes of Jewish law were revolutionary, because it used to you would either learn from the rabbis directly, or you would be able to look into the Talmud. And what do you need a code of Jewish law for? And Maimonides felt that the Jewish people needed a code of Jewish law. And he crafted something from beginning to end that would be able to be a guide to practical Jewish living. But people were not happy with that. Also, the Rambam was a philosopher. And he, not in his code of Jewish law, but in his guide for the perplexed, definitely talks about Aristotelian philosophy and is talking about Greek wisdom in ways that seem to be against the way the rabbis have always understood that Jews should be governed by Jewish tradition and not the secular sources. But the Rambam clearly prioritizes and places primacy on rabbinic tradition, but he does invoke significantly outside wisdom, and the fact that he was very much a hyper-rationalist. So for example, a very classic teaching of Maimonides has to do with the fact that God has no body, right? Jews believe in an anti-anthropomorphic God. And the way Maimonides put it is that you can only understand God by what God is not. The idea talk about negative principles, right? You can't positively ascribe something to God because God defies description. So this idea of understanding God from Maimonides faced significant opposition. So, for example, if we don't believe God has a body, what about all the expressions that we see in the Torah about the Yad Hashem, about the hand of God? And what about when you can't describe God? What about the wrath of God? These are all expressions that are found, and these are all things that the rabbis in the Talmud mention. How can Maimonides say we don't believe in any of this? So that was pretty controversial. So there were those who actually burned Rambam's books. They saw him as a heretic. And the Rashba, who was alive, Shlomo ben Aderet was alive when this was taking place, and he tried to be a bit of a calming influence. Right, he was very much believed in the validity of the Rambam and his teachings and his major significance, but he was attuned to the intellectual and religious climates of the Ashkenazic and emerging Sephardic world. And try to create a balance. And so it's with that introduction, you look at the source number 12. I see in the Gemara many things which were permitted from the realm of fortune telling, incantations, and witchcraft. These are innumerable, as long as one's intention is for the heavens. And he knows that the true healer is God, not like those whose intention is some guiding angel. So the Rashba references the fact that if you look at the totality of rabbinic literature, there's all sorts of strange stuff going on. So, to recognize them or to engage in them, and, so the example for us right now would be those amulets, right? Okay, we know that God is in charge and God is the healer. But if people are, if the people on the street are talking about amulets and rely on amulets, and there's nothing about them that goes directly against a "thou shalt not have an amulet" type of a prohibition, which there isn't, we can tolerate it. Right. So, what he's trying to say is, look, the Rambam was a purist and didn't want to tolerate any type of superstition. Right. We said before, the Rambam wasn't worried about the evil eye when gazing at someone's field. Okay, that has basis, but let's face it, if it's not prohibited, it may not be advisable, but it's something that we can tolerate. And source number 13, we do not forbid what the Gemara did not forbid due to darkei emori practice. For we do not know the segulot. We don't know the various special qualities or forces that may exist. We cannot judge from known natural laws. There's some segulot that no scientists understand, right? The kamiyot of herbs, cooking of a green rock called eshkopasi, incantations that the sages permitted. They even commanded to say them due to danger. They that said certain forms on coins heal. The Rambam himself used to make the form of a lion to heal. So now the Rashba is invoking Maimonides as a doctor, and some of the things that he would do or was known to do that seems strange from a scientific point of view. So if you take the totality of rabbinic wisdom and Jewish practice, there's some stuff in there that seems strange. But if it was never explicitly forbidden, then it may not be advisable. It may not be something to focus on. But we're not gonna outlaw it. There is an example of very popular Jewish practice that is referenced as darchei emori practice, that is still in vogue, and that's the practice of kaparas. The idea of using chickens for kaparas, where they swing the chickens and say, "This will be instead of my sin." There are those who invoke this as being Emorite and having idolatrous origins. That said, no one ever said you can't do it. It may seem like it, but people are trying to overlay it with a more spiritual purpose. Well, then that's something that we're not going to ban. Now, it may have animal cruelty things, and PETA may get involved, and the judges may get involved. But here we have something that it's a practice that some people don't want to engage in because it's too Emorite. Okay, live and let live, right? There are plenty of communities that have placed an emphasis on it, even as great, leading sages throughout the generations have decried the practice and said it comes from questionable origins and may be idolatrous in nature. Again, like the Rashba says, if it's not idolatry, if it was never full-throatedly rejected by our tradition, may not be the way to go, but we will tolerate it. And I think that these background sources of the Rashba help us understand the kind of complicated relationship that the Shulchan Aruch has with the amulets. So here we have a couple of headlines. Amulets from Joshua's time, Segula amulet, Shema Yisrael, Jews in Eastern Europe, the Hamsa, right? These are all things that have have roots in some of the Jewish conversation about something which literally translates as having a bad attitude, but then does morph and get diverted into this idea of having some negative influence and negative impact and evil eye. That is significant enough that it does shape our behavior. It may underpin some of our laws, like Rashi says with regards to gazing at the crop of someone else so as not to cast the evil eye upon it, or the way we treat, being called to the Torah, not calling relatives to the Torah, siblings, father, son. We're worried about these things. At the same time, while the Jewish tradition recognizes the possible severity or danger of the evil eye, also has developed practices to counter it as well. The Ben Parat Yosef, the Bli Ayin Hara, the Hamsa, the Segula, the Kamiya, even if it does have a complicated and it doesn't seem to be an organic, authentic Jewish response, if that's what's on the street and it's not forbidden, what do they say? Can't hurt, as they say in the old country. So that's our discussion today.